Hi, and welcome to Conversations with B'nai B'rith International. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. Thank you for spending some time with us today. If you enjoy our Conversations series, make sure you never miss an interview by subscribing to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel and liking us on Facebook. And be sure to visit our website, bnaibrith.org, to learn more about our work across the globe. Well, who would expect there to be a distinct connection between Jews, history, and chocolate? That's exactly what my guests, Rabbi Debbie Prinz and Warren Klein, are with me to talk about today. Published in 2012 and updated in 2017, Prinz's On the Chocolate Trail, a delicious adventure connecting Jews, religions, history, travel, rituals, and recipes to the magic of cacao, takes readers through the religious history of chocolate and forms the basis for the museum exhibit on Jews and Chocolate, Semite Sweet. This popular exhibition was created by the Bernard Museum of Temple Emanu-El in New York City, where Klein is curator, and has been featured in the New York Times, The Forward, and more. In our discussion today, we'll talk about historical stories of refugee Jews who both worked in the chocolate business and contributed significantly to their respective Jewish communities. Debbie, Warren, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
A pleasure.
Well, who doesn't like chocolate? We'll start with that. Debbie, I just want to say that having you speak with us this week is good timing because you have a fascinating take on the celebration of Passover, with your favorite food, chocolate, in the spotlight as the primary element. We'll get to that a little bit later, and that your interesting and socially relevant Haggadah is so important in that discussion, but we'll talk about that in a little while. So let's get right to the questions. The first one is, to both of you, let's begin by letting us know how you became involved with chocolate in this context and how it led to the exhibition Semite Sweet on Jews and Chocolate, which centers on the relationship between Jewish tradition, history, and chocolate, for which, Warren, you served as curator. Debbie, let's start with you, then we'll go to Warren.
Sure, thank you. So I think along the way of my career, I discovered that I have this radar for chocolate experiences that I refer to as chocodar. And it comes upon me serendipitously. I can't control it. It just happens. And that is basically what led to my research related to Jews and chocolate and religions and chocolate. My husband, Mark Hurwitz, and I, Mark's also a rabbi, Rabbi Mark Hurwitz, and I were on a trip through Europe. And our intention was actually to visit Reform congregations that are small, don't have full-time rabbis, to help them out, and to visit them from week to week. We'd be in a different community. We were in Paris. We happened at Chocodar to walk into a chocolate shop. Chocodar happened to pick up their company literature. And Chocodar happened to read in my high school French that this chocolate company, which is not owned by Jews, attributed chocolate making in France to Jews expelled from Spain who brought chocolate making skills to France from Spain via the city of Bayonne, France, not Bayonne, New Jersey, Bayonne, France. And that is what started me on the chocolate trail to do the research. I thought about all these possible connections between Sephardi Jews. This is an initially Sephardi story. And that led me also to Ashkenazi stories and to many interesting aspects of the connections of religious people, people of faith, and chocolate consumption. And maybe Warren would continue with the story of how the exhibit started and came to be.
Yeah, Warren, how did this subject catch your eye?
Absolutely. We are at Temple Emanu-El. We have a wonderful programming department called the Stryker Center that I work very closely with. And we're always looking for exhibitions that have a great draw so people can come visit, but that we can also do wonderful programming with people like Debbie. And my boss, I think, was in Israel, and someone gave him Debbie's book. And he brought it back to me, and he said, we have to do something with chocolate. And so when I found out Debbie lived in New York, we set up a meeting. And I'd like to go on record that maybe this is one of the first times a book has been turned into an exhibition. I just, pun intended, devoured Debbie's book and thought of the possibilities of creating this exhibition because she used so many wonderful examples from history. So she was in contact with the Newport Historical Society. She used examples of newspaper articles about colonial Jews making chocolate. So this all, to me, was really the foundation or the building blocks of an exhibition. How can we get these original objects into our space to tell that story?
So how do you gather these artifacts and these objects? I mean, chocolate it has a shelf life, if you will, but it's not only the candy bar that we're talking about. So tell us about some of the artifacts that you've gathered for this exhibition.
Right. So yeah, of course, chocolate does have a shelf life, and because of the nature of a museum, we don't want to mix food always with precious objects because it attracts bugs. So we did do a lot of creative design aspects, such as the brochure or the flyer for the exhibition was a chocolate bar, and you opened up the wrapper and you found out more information about the exhibition. We turned the floor of one of our galleries into a huge chocolate bar. And then we also had a bad experiment of trying to pump in the smell of chocolate, which, was a fun idea, but didn't work. So in terms of gathering, you do need time. I always tell people, exhibitions don't happen overnight. I think, Debbie, remind me, I think it took about 9 months to a year of planning, of reaching out to the different institutions, historical societies, private collectors. And Debbie and I spent a lot of time together figuring out the stories we wanted to tell, like the Jews of Bayonne, and a lot of the immigrant stories in the United States and in Israel, and finding those objects. Sometimes it was a challenge and we had to work with reproductions. Other times there are serendipitous things that happen, such as Albert Einstein's chocolate cup down at the Leo Baeck Institute that we were able to borrow in our gallery. So it just took a lot of time, a lot of phone calls and planning, like any exhibition.
I was just going to add that it was really delightful to work with Warren, and I was so excited that the Bernard Museum wanted to mount this exhibit and was so creative in adding chocolate components and enticing people into the exhibit by giving away chocolate bars to visitors from time to time. And we were very lucky to be able to access objects from the American Jewish Historical Society, from, as Warren said, the Leo Baeck Institute, from the family that founded Barton's Chocolate Company, big New York company, very famous, very popular company, and artifacts that the son of the founder still had in his possession. Chocolate colleagues of mine who happened to have a chocolate stone for grinding, and even the St. Nicholas Center in the Midwest lent us some objects because we were trying to tell the story of Hanukkah Gelt and how it came to be and its connection to the celebration of St. Nicholas. So it was really a very exciting process. And I had always had this little thing in the back of my head about there are so many objects and they're so beautiful. There's chocolate cups and there's chocolate pots and there's all these accoutrements for making chocolate that really did prove to make a beautiful exhibit.
So, in other words, those of us who are not so scientifically oriented could identify with Albert Einstein because he loved chocolate. That's the idea? So, walk us, if you will. Let's go back to Bayonne. Walk us through the history of chocolate making. How did it begin? How did it evolve? What are the different ways that it could be in the early days ingested? How did they actually eat this? And what are some of the many ways and forms that chocolate can be packaged? Debbie.
Well, that's a very full question with a very long answer, because chocolate is a product that's existed for many, many, many years. First enjoyed by Mayans and Aztec and Olmecs and Tolmecs, probably Central and South America, and always a beverage initially. And basically, the story of chocolate starts on a tree. The pods grow off the side of a tree. The tree has to be grown 20 degrees north of the equator, 20 degrees south of the equator. The pod contains 30 to 50 seeds. You don't see the seeds until you chop that that pod open. It's very thick rind. Inside, what you basically see is pulp with purplish seeds. Only when they're fermented do they begin to have some sort of flavor and maybe aroma and maybe brownish look that suggests chocolate as we know it today. So at some point, a long, long time ago, somebody figured out how to take that pod, ferment and roast those seeds, and to derive from that a beverage, a drink. So for many, many years, chocolate was a drink, and it would be ground, the beans, or the seeds initially, and then what we call the beans, would be ground initially on a stone, very primitively. And now, of course, it's industrially made. The grinding is laborious. It was often done by slaves or servants. Chocolate is a colonial extract product. It was probably discovered by a European discovery of chocolate was probably with Columbus's fourth voyage, and they thought what they were seeing were almonds, because that's what they knew, that's what they identified, that's what they understood things to look like. Those are almonds, but in fact, those were cocoa beans. So it took a while for Europeans to acquire the taste of chocolate, but Spaniards maintained and tried to maintain a monopoly on chocolate consumption and trade. And with time, chocolate was diffused throughout Europe, and Jews played a significant role, not the exclusive role, but a significant role in the diffusion of chocolate from the New World to the Old World. And of course, with time in the industrial period, it's made, in a much more sophisticated way, where you expect it to be smooth and creamy and have milk in it sometimes. And it's a totally different product or set of products today than what was initially enjoyed by earlier peoples who knew and loved their chocolate, who also used chocolate, by the way, for ritual purposes. So it's a very long story and a very complicated story and a very challenging story in ways having to do with the Passover mention that you made earlier. So we can come to that when you're ready.
So, and we can talk maybe at some point about dark chocolate and 72%, 70%, and 65%. I'm confused, but we can do that. We can do that later. But in terms of the trade would it be cocoa beans that Jews were importing, because Jews were traders, particularly in the New World, and they were involved in the shipping and trading business. And cacao was one of those products that they were engaged in importing.
Yes, absolutely. So Jews exiled from Spain, Sephardim, traveled east from Spain, and they also traveled west from Spain. The Jews who traveled west from Spain towards Central and South America and to the colonies, to North America, were definitely involved in lots and lots of businesses, and chocolate was one of them. And these were, of course, refugees who found resilience and opportunity and sweetness from their personal consumption as well as from their business opportunities afforded by chocolate. They maintained, connections with their family members, with other Sephardi traders and merchants, and chocolate was one of those commodities. So we have examples, for instance, in New Spain, in Mexico, that crypto Jews, secretly practicing Jews, who went to New Spain to find economic opportunity, even though the Inquisition was still present there, were secretly practicing their Judaism and also using chocolate for ritual purposes, for Kiddush on Friday nights. They were drinking chocolate before the fast of Yom Kippur started. To break the fast of Yom Kippur, they were drinking chocolate. And they were sending chocolate tablets after the chocolate was ground on the stone. They were sending these chocolate balls or tablets to mourning families as seudat chavra'ah, part of the meals of consolation. So Jews in the colonial period in North America, the British colonies, Sephardi Jews were in the business as well. The Gomez family in New York, the Lopez family in Newport, Rhode Island, significant Jewish leaders in their communities, and also involved in part in the chocolate business and retailing, manufacturing, wholesaling chocolate. There are a lot of examples of these stories in the book on the chocolate trail.
So, Warren, let's take a look at the cultural aspect of all of this. What do you think are the significance of chocolate and the process of making chocolate on Jewish life? And which particular group has typically been most involved in the production? Debbie's talked about a couple of families, talked certainly the retailing part of this, retail chocolate. We're coming up to Pesach. And we know there was a favorite chocolate company that manufactured chocolates for Pesach. But tell us a little about the cultural impact here.
Sure. I mean, maybe Debbie could speak a little bit better than me, but from some of the things that I read externally from Debbie's book too, I think chocolate did have, and I think maybe still does, people could argue, an addictive quality to it, similar to caffeine. I mean, there is caffeine in chocolate, and chocolate as a beverage, there were accounts where wealthy people in Europe, I think during the 18th century, would just be drinking it nonstop, morning, noon, and night. And I think that those wealthier people, as it trickled down and it became more manufactured and Jews were selling it in shops and producing it too in colonial time periods, it became kind of more known to the masses. I think that's probably accurate, right, Debbie?
Absolutely.
And then I think to just flash forward a couple of centuries to the 20th century, where we did have immigrants coming to the United States, and like the Klein family setting up Barton's, no relation. It became them and the oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name. Barcini, thank you. The other family, the other kind of rival chocolate company. I think they really made a product very successfully, let American Jews know that this was safe and kosher to eat during the holiday of Passover. And that was really a huge thing, and then became known as, chocolate desserts for Pesach, that we still enjoy today. And other ephemeral items came out of that as well. Barton's started producing, just like Maxwell House, a Haggadah that became very well known and collectible. And we had a few examples in our exhibition as well. So I think those kind of cultural touchstones, some of them, it was so wonderful to see in the exhibition when people would come, of a certain generation, remembering going to Barton's with their mother, remembering, the different tins that they would receive on the holidays. And what was so great that we were able to find that Barton's also had a significance to other American or non-Jewish holidays. So they would be selling Easter Bunny tins. They would be selling Christmas things as well. Those are even more collectible and rare, but I think that's an important something to note as well.
I was just going to add, important to note that the Easter eggs and the non-Jewish items were kosher. So Barton's insisted on the product line was all kosher. Stephen Klein was Orthodox practicing. He himself, an immigrant, brought over refugees from the war, and he insisted on the factory closing. And when they issued full-page ads in the New York Times, we actually had one on exhibit, educating Jews and all readers, not just Jews, about Jewish practices, about the holidays, about Israel, about the Bible. So he was a very, he was thoroughly Jewish and shared that pride in Judaism with all of his customers and the larger world.
Well, I confess to looking forward to Barton's almond kisses, actually, which did come in a tin. They were really a special treat. And I do remember the Barton's and Mariaschin retail shops in New York City. I want to ask you, we talk about the 20s and 30s. How did the German or Austrian Jewish immigration affect the chocolate business? Cafes, I'm stretching this a little bit, but we would include hot chocolate in that. And in terms of retailing, these were Central European families who opened these businesses, even some of the small independent retail stores.
Well, in the case of Barton's, that's absolutely right. Stephen Klein was from Vienna. He had a chocolate company there. When the Anschluss happened, he realized that he had no future there, and his business was actually confiscated by the Nazis. So he really decided to leave within a day or two and came to New York, started out very small, and eventually became very successful. I think what you're just certainly is a lot of candy in the New York area, a lot of candy stores that started even before that, probably in the late 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century. Economy candy might be one of the residual examples of that. And Tootsie Rolls. There's a few products that Jews were involved in creating along the lines of candy, and they were immigrant products, much earlier than post-World War II. What's interesting about the World War I, World War II period is that there were also a lot of immigrants from Central Europe, Eastern Europe, who started small bakeries, and they were baking lots of Jewish or old school European baked goods, Lichtmans, eclairs, Gürtels. There's just a slew of them. They all have their own immigration stories, and they don't exist so much anymore. I think maybe Russ and Daughters is maybe a kind of holdover of that, even though it's an appetizing store, not a bakery. Zabar's might be a long-lasting, one of the last standing of those. Barney Greengrass, another example. But so I'm interested in this piece because of the chocolate, which led me to Chocolate Babka, which led me to my current project about Jewish celebratory breads. And that led me to all these wonderful immigrant bakeries in the New York area of that period of time that you're asking about, actually. So I think we see it even more in bakeries than in chocolate at that point, although they used chocolate. And chocolate was said to be, I don't know if you know about blackout cake from Ebinger's Bakery in Brooklyn. It was a big thing in the New York area. And Jews were said to especially have a fondness for that blackout cake.
So what is your favorite? What's your favorite chocolate babka of all?
Well, that is a very, as it were, loaded question. And a number of friends and I were able to do some chocolate babka tastings. And generally speaking, in each of those tastings, the Oneg Hamisha chocolate babka from Williamsburg, which is a Satmar area, tended to always be number one. It's now available online.
Okay. Well, look, we're doing this program just before Passover, which we'll be celebrating just in a couple of days. How were you inspired to compile the innovative text for the observance of the Haggadah for a socially responsible chocolate Seder? And what are its hallmarks? And how do you make connections between the Haggadah and social action?
I was thinking about Jewish values. A rabbi, I can't help myself but think about Jewish values, whatever I do, whatever I look at, whatever I read. And as I was researching the book on the chocolate trail, I kept thinking, okay, how do our Jewish values relate to this food product? And obviously there's a lot of conversation about eco-kashrut and more contemporary ethical certifications for foods. And so the last chapter of the book is actually devoted to ethics in chocolate consumption, and there's a lot of issues there. And as I was thinking about chocolate consumption and the Barton's company, especially around Pesach, as you noted, the almond kisses, and I believe there was a tin of the almond kisses in the exhibit, if I'm remembering correctly. It occurred to me that, and also there's a lot of chocolate Seder celebrations, youth groups, college Hillel groups, some sisterhoods, others have celebrated what they call chocolate Seder. So I was looking at those and I thought, these are kind of light in content, as it were. Not light chocolate, but light in content, even and a kind of an excuse for gorging on a lot of chocolate, and maybe not such great chocolate, in my opinion. So it seemed like a great way to combine a conversation around Jewish values, freedom, ethics, food justice, fair labor practices at Passover. After all, what are the messages of Passover? In addition, I had learned in the research that over 2 million children in West Africa, in Ghana and the Ivory Coast, work in endangered labor harvesting cocoa beans, or they're slaves, actually. And so to ameliorate that and to bring Jewish community attention to the challenges of our chocolate consumption and which chocolate we choose, I wanted to use the Haggadah as an opportunity to raise questions very appropriate for the Haggadah and raise awareness.
Are any of the, in your Haggadah, any of the brachot, any of the blessings different? And tell us about your version of the 4 questions.
So the content of the Haggadah is pretty much basic Haggadah text because I wanted people to have familiarity. I wanted them to either use it for their full Seder experience, to introduce the, to prepare for Seder, or to do sometime later during the week of Pesach, maybe, or to supplement their Haggadah. So that actual content is pretty familiar and pretty standard, but it's pared down to allow for questions around fair trade practices and chocolate issues. And so we ask questions related to where does your chocolate come from? Where is this chocolate from? The maror, the ritual foods are all in chocolate. The maror is 100% bitter chocolate. So you talked about the percentages before. This is, I don't know, some people like that 100%. I don't particularly like it, but it obviously is a way of reminding people of the bitterness of the slavery of our ancestors, as well as reminding people of the bitterness of those children in West African cocoa production, which is, by the way, the source of the predominant export of cocoa beans today. So people have an opportunity to look at video. I make suggestions about which videos they might look at to supplement the content of the Haggadah. I make suggestions about chocolate ritual, how to portray the ritual objects through chocolate, what to eat, what not to eat, where to get the chocolate, and so on. And one of the challenges for chocolate consumption is this question of, do I use Israeli chocolate? Do I use chocolate that is hechshered, kosher for Passover, certified kosher for Passover, or do I use a fairly traded or fair traded chocolate for Passover? Because usually you do not find the two together. You do not find a fair trade certified chocolate on a kosher for Passover chocolate. They do not come together. So generally, if you're concerned about one, you don't have the other. There's only one company which is on the list of appropriate kosher for Passover food items on the list of the Rabbinic Assembly, made by Equal Exchange, and they are fairly traded, and they are also certified kosher for Passover. It's only one company that I know of that is available, and that's another issue that is addressed in the Haggadah.
So let me go back to the exhibition question for both of you. Are there young Jews in the artisanal manufacturing category who are entering this field of making chocolate production, and are they represented in any way in the exhibition? Warren.
I'm sure they are out there, but we did not represent them in the exhibition. But if I could add, first of all, there was so many other stories and research that, in our small museum of 1,400 square feet, we just couldn't show everything. But I do want to just touch on what Debbie just mentioned, that, the ethical production and harvesting of beans and making of chocolate, I thought was so important to add to the exhibition because I just felt like it really aligned with a lot of the Jewish values. And we do have so many students that come to see our exhibition. So while that was a harder thing to illustrate through objects, it was a story that we added at the end of the exhibition. But I think maybe Debbie, I don't know if you want to talk about kind of younger people producing chocolate.
I do know of a few people who are in the artisanal small chocolate production, bean to bar. I mean, everybody actually does bean to bar because everybody's starting with the beans. But bean to bar tends to be the way we refer to artisanal chocolate makers. There are some who are Jewish, but I'm not sure that they're particularly seeing themselves as bringing their Jewish identity into their chocolate making, or necessarily even know about the Jewish past related to chocolate making. They're in the business because they want to be in the business. I would add to the issue of fairly traded slave ingredient in our Passover chocolate issue that there is a bit of a movement now in Israel to call upon chocolate makers in Israel to fair trade certify their chocolate, especially for Passover. There was an article just in there, or coming out, I think, in a day or so in the Israeli press. It'll come out in the Jerusalem Post in a few days about this issue. And I think that these folks are calling for a boycott of Passover chocolate until there is actually available in Israel a fair trade certified chocolate option for Passover.
Well, we look forward to hearing more about that. Let me ask you before we close, a couple of things. I want to talk to you about your forthcoming books. Is there a Debbie Prinz chocolate somewhere in the future? Are you...
Oh, that's a sweet question that you're asking me, but I can say definitively, never will I be making chocolate. I mean, the closest I will ever come to having my name near a chocolate is if I go to one of those companies that, creates that for you, an online company. Was the chocolate cover that the Bernard Museum, the label that the Bernard Museum created for the chocolate gifts that they gave out to people? So no, I think chocolate making is extremely difficult. I would never, ever attempt it. I tried grinding cocoa beans on one of those metate Pierre's stones once. After 2 minutes, I was exhausted. That is not my thing.
So it's easier just to open up the wrapper and enjoy the chocolate rather than making it. Well, Debbie, what can you tell us about your forthcoming books? There are two: The Boston Chocolate Party and On the Trail of Jewish Celebratory Breads, which you alluded to a little bit earlier.
Right. Well, thank you for asking. I'm so excited. I just saw the jacket cover for the Boston Chocolate Party. It went to the printer the other day. It will be available in October, just in time for Hanukkah gifts for children and grandchildren and children friends. It's a story about an 8-year-old named Joshua set in Newport, Rhode Island, loosely related to the Aaron Lopez story there and colonial chocolate making, and builds around the coincidence of the Boston Tea Party occurring on the last night of Hanukkah. And so we have a narrative of redemption and celebration and the parallel stories of freedom sought by American colonists and by the Maccabees and our Jewish ancestors, all in this really fun story about Joshua and his best friend, Isaac.
And a little bit more about the breads, because you started that, and that really looks like a fascinating topic.
Yes, and the chocolate is what led me to the babka, which is what led me to the celebratory breads, and it turns out that there are so many, other than challah, celebratory breads. We all think of challah. Oh yes, wonderful, and we all love it, of course. I don't want to diminish it. But there are Jews globally who have been celebrating Shabbat and the holidays with myriad beautiful and yeasted breads for holidays and as well as for Shabbat, bridal breads that are amazing, and many customs and rituals and halachic questions around these breads that I will be sharing in the book on the chocolate. Actually, this one's on the bread trail. So thank you for asking about it. I'm very excited about it. It will be available in 2023, and I'm in the midst of working on the chocolate babka chapter as we speak.
Well, I hope you'll come back and we can talk about bread the next time.
I would love to.
Well, the exhibition is On Jews and Chocolate, Semite Sweet, created by the Bernard Museum of Temple Emanu-El in New York City. And you can learn more about it at onthechocolatetrail.org. Debbie, Warren, thank you both for joining us and talking to us about the fascinating connections between Jews and chocolate. This is certainly the hungriest a conversation has ever made me. It's been great speaking with both of you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, our thanks to Rabbi Debbie Prinz and Warren Klein for introducing us to the world of Jews, Jewish tradition, and chocolate. And thank you for tuning in to this conversation with B'nai B'rith. Now, if you enjoyed this interview, make sure you catch all of our programs by subscribing to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel and liking us on Facebook. And be sure to visit our website, b'naib'rith.org, to learn more about our important work, including our efforts on the ground providing Ukrainian refugees in Poland, Moldova, and Romania, as well as those suffering horrifying wartime conditions in Ukraine with basic necessities. For my guests, Rabbi Debbie Prinz and Warren Klein, and for B'nai B'rith, I'm Dan Mariaschin. Join us again soon.